The Unconventional Therapist's Guide to Nothing.
We are the Unconventional Therapists, and this is your guide to nothing, where each and every week we take a topic, theme, or thing, overanalyze it, and make it all make sense in the scheme of life, living, and mental health. Hey everyone, this is Dave, and I'm joined here with Greg, and we are about to get started on this week's episode, which is a freaking bummer. Is that right?
It's a bummer. Greg? It's a wild one.
This is a terrible story. I'm sorry. Actually,
you do owe me an apology. Listen, on this episode, we're talking about reactive attachment disorder, which is essentially the deficiency of love and caring for a young child, and how potentially dangerous and heartbreaking that can be. We're going to do that through the lens of one of the most unsettling case studies I've ever seen in my entire life. So I saw this, Dave sent me this video without context, and it's this young child talking about a 6-year-old girl talking about animal abuse and murder and molestation completely without emotion or conscience. And I'm thinking to myself, like, was this kid buried in a pet cemetery or something like that? It's something so bizarre, and there's something so dark and haunting about it. I couldn't believe it. And of course, Dave, we're talking about Beth Thomas here. So thanks for that.
Yeah. This is a super interesting topic. And Greg, I'm going to be honest with you. Like, I think there's certain topics that I get more stressed out about than others. And the ironic thing, and I think we've talked about this in some context before, is it's actually when it's like something I feel like I'm supposed to know more than others, it feels more stressful. And the reason why I say that with this topic is I can't tell you how many people teens or kids I've come across who have reactive attachment disorder, or even adults who suffered from it. So it's something that I'm like actually pretty familiar with as far as like working with individuals with it. However, sitting here talking about it and making sure I get all the points across and all that stuff, or just the importance of understanding it, feels super stressful.
Yeah. So for me, it's after seeing this, I start questioning, have I ever actually seen reactive attachment disorder? Because this, like all things are on a spectrum, this is one of the most severe cases. And we'll talk about that. So we're talking about Beth Thomas, and let's talk a little bit about what happened to her, right? So her mother passed away from kidney disease when she was 1. I couldn't really find out a lot about her mother, like what that relationship was like, what kind of person she was. But this left Beth and her younger brother alone with their father and into a routine of neglect, physical and sexual abuse.
Yeah.
Intense.
Yeah. So there's, I guess an assumption can be made that perhaps some of this abuse was happening prior to the mom's death, but there is no doubt that it heightened and intensified upon the mother's death, and for about the next 7 months, I believe, if or give or take, I believe.
Yeah. So about that, because she was a year and then 19 months old that they were taken away. But Dave, I was just thinking, it's nice to grow up with a loving, caring parent to care for you and take care of you. But it's not only nice, it's a condition of our survival. Other animals don't need this. Other animals can be born from their parents and just kind of walk off and be completely fine. But with human beings, this needs to be sort of learned and pressed down for the continuation of our species, right?
Yeah.
And if somehow you don't get that love and you're not taught love and you survive without the capacity for love, you either seem like or you are without humanity. And then I think that's what's happening here.
And, so with this situation, when it's discovered, at some point, Beth was being evaluated by a doctor who saw some red flags with Beth and had no doubt that there was some physical and sexual abuse happening. So he contacted social services. Social services does an investigation and finds her brother Jonathan in his bassinet This is, I believe he's about 7 months old at this time.
Yeah.
Soaked in his own urine and feces. Diaper hadn't been changed in days. He has a bottle of milk with the milk's actually curdled. It had been in there for so long. And one of the more disturbing factors about this is the shape of his head. So his head was flat in the back and it was bulging in the front from, not being picked up and from laying for long periods of time.
So your head, that can happen with kids, even with good parents. The head can take a little.
Yeah.
What was heartbreaking for me is the little bottle of milk at his feet, curdled milk. Yeah. I mean, that's so sad. And he's 7 months old. This is heartbreaking. Imagine like living in a state of perpetual trembling fear, Dave. Like in like cartoons, like I'm thinking of Cinderella when like Gus and he's so scared of the cat. I don't know if you remember that scene, but he's like literally shaking. Like think of the most terrified you've ever been in your entire life and then living that way for 7 months straight with no understanding of hope, no way out, no fight or flight. She's 19 months old.
Yeah. She was actually being sexually abused to the point where she was bleeding from her private areas.
Yeah.
And they were also both found completely alone in the house. And the father was unaware of the investigation happening and was nowhere to be found at the time. So a 7-month-old and a 1-year-old just alone.
It's a miracle that they survived.
Oh yeah, super strong, right? Resilient.
Right. Oh yeah, it makes you like appreciate the human, like how the strength of human beings. Like we're always thinking about how fragile we are, but this is like a testament to human strength.
Right.
Now let's talk about what happened from here. Like obviously the child services have to pull them from this family and they get adopted fairly quickly, right?
Fairly quickly. Yep.
And what do you think that's about?
I mean, it's one of those things. It's like, is it dishonesty to, just have these children who are grow up in these conditions to just be quickly adopted? And, so they're adopted to Tim and his wife, Julie Tennant. Tim is a pastor, and they're not given much information other than like the basic understanding that obviously they were found in some kind of neglectful scenario. Otherwise, this wouldn't, they wouldn't have been taken from their families.
So yeah, they had no idea the extent of what happened to them, and they didn't have any clue until Beth started exhibiting some, I guess I'll call it odd behavior, to the point where they felt like they had to lock her in her room. And this is where they end up bringing her to obviously a psychologist. And do you want to talk about the disturbing, this is when the disturbing video comes in, the interview with her and some of the things that she's talking about?
Yeah. So, I mean, at this point we start, to get information about some of the concerns that are happening in the house, some of the things that Tim and Julie are seeing. And Beth talks so frankly about such disturbing information. It's so off-putting, but like it just leaves your jaw dropped hearing some of the things she says. And she's talking
in her like little adult, sweet 6-year-old voice
talking about adult matters.
Right. Yeah. Like some of the things that she's talking about, like she talks about the abuse from her father. Like she has nightmares of a man falling on her and hurting her in her, private areas. I mean, her stepmom, and she admits to it in the interview, constantly finds her masturbating. This is a 6-year-old child.
She was in a public parking lot. She was masturbating and she wasn't aware of why that was wrong.
Right. I mean, she's been treated that way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's clear, obvious signs of abuse. I mean, it doesn't have to, I mean, the animal abuse. Did you about the birds?
This was a dark story for sure. So Beth finds a nest of baby birds, and Julie tells her, just to leave them be. You don't want to hurt them. The mother will return for them. The next day, Julie finds the baby birds on the ground outside of the nest, all dead. And Beth admits to squeezing each one of them to death, one at a time.
She wanted one at a time. And she just, the way she explains it, no emotion, no conscience, nothing.
I heard that she did admit that she liked the baby birds who couldn't see because it's like exerting control over something,
Yeah.
right? Or
They need
power over
control.
something.
Yeah. And in the middle of the night, they think the baby keeps waking up and they think that maybe the baby's sick, and it's Beth sticking pins in him and molesting him.
Yeah.
I mean, she stole knives from the kitchen and admittedly was going to use them to murder her little brother and her parents.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
a 6-year-old, cute little 6-year-old girl saying this.
So aside from just the molestation towards her brother, which was discovered, like the mom walked in and, discovered him with his pants down, and she had actually inserted a finger in his anus and, was doing some acts on him, but also she was at times inflicting pain to his penis, and pinching it, just a number of things she was describing that are just expressing her hatred towards private parts, first of all, right?
Is it hatred or is it just what she knows of the world?
I think it's fear, because I think she's afraid that this is what she's learned to know, that this is what people do with their private parts, right? They hurt you. So she has those nightmares about her dad falling, a part of him falling into her and hurting her, things like that. So I just, and she admits with the knife.
You don't have to be Freud to interpret that dream. You know what I mean?
No, not at all. And with the knives that she was stealing, they were little paring knives that, perfect for her.
Perfect size for her. It's so dark.
And she admits that she wanted to kill her brother and Tim and Julie, and so that nobody else could hurt her.
Yeah.
But this is a person that is in survival mode, right? Survival. So here's where reactive attachment disorder is so challenging. It plays out the most obvious and the most, I don't know what the word would be. It's the most difficult because it's happening in environments that that doesn't match. Like she's in an environment where people are showing her love finally, and she's in survival mode. She doesn't need to be in survival mode. And that's why it's so problematic. It's like the brain, it's that trauma response, right? And now the brain is just constantly in hypervigilance and in protection mode for her. So for her,
and she doesn't have the insight to understand that she's in a safe spot.
Exactly. And it looks different for every individual. Every individual experiences, their emotions differently, their actions look different. For her, it's coming out as like, I'm going to kill you. So I
was almost thinking like, so she's smashing her brother's head on the floor. She gets caught doing that on multiple occasions. I mean, on a cement floor. She could have killed this poor kid.
Yeah.
But the part of me was thinking, is on some level she trying to save her brother from what she went through? No, right?
I don't believe so. Insight. No, I don't believe so. I do believe with her case, it's very egocentric. There's a lack of compassion, caring. I wouldn't say, maybe not caring. Maybe she can care, but I don't think she has empathy. I don't think she has a lot of the basic emotions that allow us to form solid relationships or to even want to protect someone.
She's almost, and I hate to say this, in a sense, inhuman. She's missing a very human component, and that's the capacity for love. She was never given that. She was never shown that. And I apparently it's not intrinsic in us. It has to be taught.
Greg, the thought that you just had made me think of a word, and I think this kind of fits the state that she's at this point. Primitive. It's primitive. It's like those basic instincts that we have when we are without, all the other conditioning that we all have as we grow up. Our basic instinct is survival. We learn communication to survive. But now she's in a heightened state where it's like survival means not only needing to get my needs met, but also I got to protect myself because people are trying to hurt me.
Primitive is a good word because this morality that we all have is so that society can exist. She's doing only what's best for her. Yeah. And in the best for her survival, the way she interprets the world is everyone is dangerous. Everyone is dangerous. So that's kind of leading us right into RAD, reactive attachment disorder. And obviously the first years of a child's life are incredibly important for development. You're a blank slate, essentially.
Yeah.
Something that has to develop that we take for granted, and this case especially is making me see that, is a conscience. You never think that you have to develop a conscience.
Sure.
That you think that it's almost a natural part of being a human, but it's not. Mm-hmm. You have to nurture that and develop that. So if a child is born in conditions where their needs aren't met, it's a loveless condition, this disorder develops. This is what happens.
There's a few things that can bring on reactive attachment disorder.
Yeah.
So like you were saying, the needs not being met, they're not getting the nurturing. For some individuals, if they bounce around residences. So for example, like the setting I used to work at with teens, it was a group home setting. And then I worked with kids who were, under 18, and they had already lived in 8 different group homes, plus wherever they live prior to actually getting into group home placements. You know how many different people have been in and out of their lives?
Yeah.
That's why I was
important thing.
Yeah, I was seeing it so often because of our own systems that are in place. Like literally, group homes are devised for people to come in and out because it has employees, and employees don't stay forever. So you're not going to have a bunch of people who are forever going to be in these kids' lives. So it's kind of like a revolving door, how many people they meet.
So essentially lack of stability, right?
Lack of stability.
Hunger, unclean, no affection. So no secure attachments. That's like no established attachments.
Yeah.
It's torture for them. Beth was part of all these conditions.
Sure. Yeah. Kids who are in orphanages. You hear about this a lot with also like, what do you call them? International adoptions.
Yeah.
Because some of the conditions of the orphanages there are different than our systems here. There's a lot of ways an individual doesn't have stability as a youth.
I think that's what creates this spectrum. Like you can have a couple of these and have reactive attachment disorder, but not at this level. And so like, do you want to talk about some of the symptoms, like how this manifests? Like, sad,
yes, I do.
Unexplained withdrawal.
Yeah, like you're exactly right. Sad, or like looking like a withdrawal, not showing positive emotions.
Yeah, like not even being able to smile, like an inability to show happiness.
They might avoid eye contact. Physical touch might be something that actually doesn't feel good to them at all. They might express fear or anger by throwing tantrums or frequently showing unhappiness or sadness, and trying to find things in their environment that they can control, which makes them likely to break rules, like we just talked about.
So that's a good point, because it's like this failure to ask for help or seek assistance. Because they don't even understand what that is.
Yeah, and
that's what normal kids. And I think of like one thing was saying that at her age, she should be reaching up for like all little 2-year-olds, they reach up for you. Not at all. Like there's just, because no one was picking her up. No one was showing her these basic, even smiling. Imagine being 19 months old and no one smiled at you.
Yeah.
It's just really sad.
So other ways that I've seen it manifest is in individuals' abilities to build relationships. And I saw this a lot with teenagers, where it was a lot of like push and pull in the relationships. It reminded me a lot of borderline. And that's
I was going to say that.
When we did the borderline
for kids.
Yeah, when we did the borderline episode, I think I brought up reactive attachment because I've always seen it so similar. I've worked with individuals who, you start building rapport with, you think you're good with them, and then suddenly something just switches, and the next thing you know, they're tearing you to shreds. They're pushing you away. They want nothing to do with you. I worked with a lot of individuals who had like aggressive behavior. So next thing I know, they're trying to fight me, or they're trying to fight other people that were there. So the relationship building with individuals like this is so tough, because they're scared to have close relationships, because in their eyes, everybody leaves at some point.
Right. So that makes sense. And that can kind of segue us into the treatment of this thing, because you bring up borderline. And I think that the treatment of this has to be similar to the treatment of borderline. essentially you need secure, stable relationships, consistency, routine, something they can count on, these kids, positive stimulation, like being treated like a child, right?
Yeah.
Patience, of course, but more than anything, Dave, LOVE, buddy.
Yeah, but I mean, in their defense, like Tim and Julie were doing their best with Beth, and like they were trying to give her that love and support. They were a loving household, and that is, as much as that's like a very integral part of being a caretaker for someone with reactive attachment and part of the treatment. It's unfortunately not enough.
No, but I do think that couple was her saving grace, because
yes,
I mean, because she got her
the support she needed.
How many times do we hear stories about kids in abusive families who get into the system and then get to a foster family and they're in another abusive conditions? They're in more abusive conditions. So this was like, this family couldn't handle this, and admittedly, I mean, they couldn't. They had to lock her in her room at night so that they weren't murdered.
Well, and she did work with a lot of professionals too.
Right.
So I mean they were the ones who were able to support the family and help her get the help she needed. And, a big part of what they were told was you have to set incredibly firm boundaries and limits. They actually went to the extreme. You have to go to the exact extreme because she's never learned or experienced any of it. No boundaries, no limits. So you had basically, they were at a point where Beth had to ask for everything, permission to do everything. She had to ask permission to go to the bathroom. She had to ask permission. And part of it was supervision, like not letting her out of her sight because you never know what she's going to do. Right. But also it's that like experiencing what it's like to live within reasonable settings and have appropriate boundaries with others.
Well, she's like asking for things, asking for everything she needs is showing her that you can trust people.
Yes.
That people aren't always dangerous. And eventually it kind of shows her that you can be loved. And this was completely immersive. This had to be like an inpatient situation. And did you read about one of the doctors who, she wasn't a doctor, but there was a therapist and her name was Connell Watkins. And she was very helpful to Beth, but she ended up being put in a very, so Connell Watkins was trying to do this new form of therapy where she was thinking, all right, these kids were put in these horrible situations. Maybe they need to try to be birthed again. They need like a rebirth, like a do-over. So she was doing this with kids, and she did it with a 10-year-old kid who was severely abused, and the kid ended up suffocating. And it turned out that Connell Watkins was not licensed at all.
Oh boy.
Oh boy is right. So, but Beth.
Wait, how was she doing this?
She was, recreating the birth canal. So I guess I don't know the exact setup that she had, but she was doing this thing where it's like, okay, your first birth didn't work out. Let's give this thing another shot. And then during the process of this, I guess it wasn't metaphoric. It must've been pretty realistic. This kid, suffocated in this, mechanism.
I wonder what they had to go through, what the canal was made of.
Wasn't good, apparently. I'll tell you what though, Beth was so her life was so turned around by Connell Watkins that she testified for her at her trial and said, look, I'm completely cured because of this person. So I know things are kind of tough. So, but honestly though, into Beth's teens, as she got a little bit older, these feelings obviously started to resurface when she was like talking to boys and, things were maybe progressing sexually, and she was treated with EMDR. I thought you would find that kind of interesting.
Yes, I did hear that. Yep.
I think that's pretty interesting. And
so what's EMDR, Greg?
Eye movement, something.
DR.
DR, yeah.
Doctors. Eye movement doctor. No, I don't know. So
what does it stand for again? Obviously not certified in that. But I know it has to do with it's almost like you have your trauma and then you relive this trauma, but in a safer way and in a distracted way where you're changing the way your body reacts to that trauma.
Okay.
So it's like, I've done this with people where I've had them recount their trauma, and then I would pretend like we're watching a movie, and I would have them pause it and rewind it and kind of like mess with the timeline of their trauma so that, it's going back into their brain, but it's going back into their brain differently. And it was a learned experience in a safe setting where it doesn't have the same effect on them. I mean, you could do that with a lot of different things. You could make them, tell their trauma and then, do like, math problems while they're telling their problem. Like ask them like a kind of a simple, 5 times 5 in the middle of telling you about a trauma. And it's like confusing to your brain because it's like, I'm reliving this trauma, but I'm also doing math. So it's interesting though, isn't it?
I mean, why math?
I just find math
hard for trauma on trauma. Trauma on trauma right there.
No, because it's like, I know trauma on trauma, you're absolutely right. But it's like, you're reliving this thing. And oftentimes for people, people who have severe trauma, just talking about it, they have all those feelings and their bodies, like those same mechanisms in your brain are going off. Sometimes your brain can't tell the difference between reliving it through telling the story or it actually happening. But
I was just curious why you chose math as your.
If you're doing long division while you're telling the story, I mean, it's going to be remembered in your brain a little bit different.
Okay. I was thinking like drinking a pina colada or something while I'm talking about my traumas.
Yeah, that's probably better. I gotta work on some of these things,
Hey, Greg. So one more thing that we didn't mention, just going back a little bit, we were talking about setting limits and boundaries, love. The other big part of it, aside from those things, which are super important, is also just not giving huge reactions to challenging behavior. And that sounds very obvious, but it's not. Like, you got to think about somebody who's been in like a traumatic, abusive environment. They don't know what to expect from the person that they fear, right? The person, their parental figure or their whatever. So they're used to like walking on eggshells and never knowing when the big response is going to happen. So when the parent is able to, respond very calmly, like the way that I would always want to respond with when I'm working with kids and they're doing challenging things, just I call it neutral. I don't look mad. I don't look happy. I do try to look happy when they're doing good things, but when they're not doing good things, it's.
Do you call that robot, Dave? You're like essentially doing the robot.
Yeah, essentially. It's just flat. It's just very flat. It's so. But what they see is they're doing wrong, but I'm not mad. And I've had kids ask me like, "Are you mad? Are you mad? Are you mad?" Like, I will be if you ask me one more time. No, but like, no, I'm not mad. I'm not mad. It is what it is. But that can be really hard. So you have to like. As much as you're trying to discipline your child, you also have to be disciplined yourself. Mm-hmm. And I think 100%. I think it's helping them understand that like you can mess up and you're not going to get abused for it. You're not going to get beaten or whatever. But I also think it's modeling, right?
100%. And I think the only time it's appropriate to discipline, and look, I'm not judging parents. I'm a parent myself. No one's perfect. But ideally, you want to discipline when you're under control too.
Are you talking? You're talking about just like any kind of discipline,
any kind of discipline,
grounding.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Like you don't
ground
want
your kids
emotionally disciplined. What's that?
You ground your kids?
Yeah, sure. I mean, they've been pretty good lately. So, but yeah, no. If I try to teach them lessons when they do something wrong. And do I yell? Yes.
You don't ground the one that wants to be me on the podcast.
I've after grounding him for that exact reason. Not
How dare you?
He learned his lesson for that. I yelled at him pretty good.
How dare you ground my future co-host?
You know what's funny, Dave? Do you know something interesting about what Beth is doing now? Did you learn about that?
No, you go ahead and tell me.
She's a nurse, which I think is one of the most empathetic jobs that you can have.
For sure. So
this is it kind of ends well. Although I don't know what happened to the brother. In my head, I was like, maybe he's Jonathan Taylor Thomas.
I've actually never heard anything about the brother. And I've like researched this for pretty extensive amounts of time. And I never heard anything about the brother.
Yeah,
that's a good point. I never even thought about the brother.
Oh man, come on. How could you not? Brother, this kid was struggling too. I mean, I think he got the brunt of it.
I would say.
Yeah. So anyways, the couple pop culture, mentions. Child of Rage is based completely on this. It was,
which you can view on YouTube, I believe.
Yeah.
I think it's up there.
And not attachment disorder, but this very much reminded me of The Good Son.
Interesting.
You don't remember? Do you remember that movie, Macaulay
Of
Culkin?
course, I remember that one.
Great movie.
Oh, I don't remember.
What do you
it being
think his
great.
story was? What did he have?
I don't know.
He was a sociopath. And I think that this is different from antisocial personality disorder. And especially through the lens of Beth, we can see that because she was able to develop a conscience and empathy. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And Dave, I think that if anything has shown us for this statement to be true is we are certainly a reflection of the way we were treated as a child.
Yes. I would 100% say so.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I actually worked with an individual who was adopted from an orphanage in Romania.
Oh, cool.
And he had reactive attachment disorder.
Okay.
And he had a very strong attachment to one of the, I don't know what do you call the heads of the orphanages?
The Grandmaster.
No, I don't think that's it, Greg.
No, okay.
We're not going to say that one.
Matilda. I don't
Something
know.
like that. So when
the headmaster, it could be
when
the
he was,
headmaster.
yeah, maybe I think it's that actually. So when he was adopted, he struggled significantly being removed from the orphanage and from the headmaster, and that didn't play out well. So yeah, that wasn't
difficult.
That wasn't a great case. I have that one's a sad case because I don't know if I should even say this. Unfortunately, he's passed away.
Dave.
Yeah, that was at about 17, I think he was. And
now, if you don't mind me,
so he resided where I worked for a period of time. With there was more going on than just reactive attachment. There was some psychosis as well, and I kind of lost track of him when he left the group home because he had been doing well. And a couple of years later, we got word that there was a kid missing, and he's kind of fit the criteria of who this individual was. And then we turned out they found his body, and it was him, and that was really shocking to say the least.
David, I'm sorry because I know that how much effort and caring and how important your work's been to you through all these years. I mean, it's led you where you are now. I mean, I'm sorry to hear that story.
Yeah, that definitely sucked, to say the least, to hear something like that of that nature. And that's the unfortunate part about this work. It's not always great outcomes for everybody, and we always want that. But sometimes you hear something and you're like, damn, that really takes me a step back. This was years ago now, so it's obviously it feels sort of removed, but it's crazy to even think when I think about it. And then I actually have somewhat of a positive case. There was a kid I knew when he was 14. He struggled with reactive attachment disorder, and I actually work with him in a different setting again. Now he's now 18, and he is one of the most insightful kids I have ever met in my life. And we talk so openly and candidly about his reactive attachment disorder that it's like, I wish everybody had this amount of insight. The way that he describes how scary it is to get attachments to people because he's afraid that they're going to at some point leave him. It's like heartbreaking, but I'm just like always so every time he does it, I'm always so proud of him.
Yeah.
I wish he could always take that knowledge and like utilize it in the moment when he's having his emotional dysregulation. Unfortunately, that's still something he hasn't mastered, but just the fact that like when he's removed, we're sitting down in my office and he's sitting there and he's telling me like how scary things are. And I'm like,
it's scary. Like it is so scary that attachment can be so scary. Because what's scariest is living life without it. So like, attachment is what makes us human. Without it, we definitely become something else. Attachment is that bridge that we have to humanity. It's what makes us human. And it gives us this reverence for love and an understanding of the importance of life. Attachment to other people. I mean, I think that's how you define the word human being.
Yeah.
And this is a case where another basic psychology tenet here is strong case, nature versus nurture. I mean, obviously, nurture plays a hugely significant role in the person you're going to be. And that guy, B.F. Skinner, the man who came up with operant conditioning, he made the case that, look, I can take any human being and I can make a serial killer or I can make a doctor. And this case sort of, I mean, I don't know if that seems extreme, but it certainly makes the case where the way you are raised is going to play a significant role in who you become. And I know that sounds obvious, but wow, it puts a lot of pressure on people as parents, right?
Yeah. The good thing to know is that for the most part, like if you're just doing your basic parenting role, you are most likely not going to create a scenario like this.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're there, if you're being a caring parent, you're providing the basic necessities, you're doing better than
absolutely
these conditions right
absolutely.
there. Like you're not going to create these conditions if you're doing the things you're supposed to do.
You know what's interesting about this case too? I'm surprised. I mean, there was definitely an instance where you could see dissociative identity disorder developing. I mean, how like this reminds me very much of the Billy Milligan case, but Beth.
So, and that's crazy that you just said that, because like I was just telling you about that individual and the psychosis, but like during his moments of psychosis, it was like he was a different person.
Yeah.
He was a totally changed individual. He was doing behaviors he never would do when he was, in his normal headspace.
Maybe for her brain, she was so young that her brain didn't even have the capacity, because sometimes the idea of what happens is there's such a severe trauma, and it doesn't get much more severe than that. Your father falling on you.
I feel like that's something right there, Greg. Yeah. I feel like her brain was not able to dissociate. So she just became that it's that survival version of herself. It's that when we were talking about to Billy Milligan's sister, it was like what she was describing, where there was that she almost felt like she was able to dissociate at times and hear another voice that would help her survive,
right?
Would guide her, but it didn't like take over her.
So for Billy, it was like this horrific traumatic thing was happening to him. He was a little bit older, and his brain recognized your personality, your identity can't handle this. Here's one that can.
Yeah.
She didn't have that privilege.
No. So,
she had to deal with it.
That's clearly has to be something that develops over time and with age and brain development.
Maybe that's evolutionary too.
Did we just create science?
Dude, we're always be creating science on this thing.
You hear how intense we just got when we like realized we were onto something?
Yeah.
Wait.
So let me ask you this, Dave. Like, I mean, so you're not born with a conscience?
I guess
you always feel like you're. So what does that? Oh, what does that say about the soul? I don't even want to go there, dude. I mean, obviously, there's, man.
No, and I do see how that, like, all right, Greg, think about it this way, and this is probably a bad example, but think about like how our families influence us. And if you grew up in a family that is prejudiced against a certain group of people, you would probably be able to act and like you witnessed them acting very hateful towards people and doing terrible acts towards people of that population. You would probably be able to engage in that same behavior and not feel bad about it.
Of course not.
So it's learned.
Absolutely.
We learn to have compassion, to feel guilt, because we feel like we're doing something that's against, like it comes back to the values conversation, right? We build our set of core values. And then when we act against those core values, we feel emotions like guilt, just negative.
So people aren't naturally good.
I've always told you this.
The thing is, Dave, that's that huge existential question. What, existentialism is just saying, like, the belief before existentialism was that your essence, who you are, comes before your existence, right? But existentialism is your existence happens and then your essence becomes a part of you. So you have to develop that.
And
this is wow.
So I think that rather than the thought that everyone is like, you hear people say like, I believe everyone is good.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's more like everybody has the capacity to be good, but not everybody is good because they didn't learn good. Maybe they didn't learn what is right, what is wrong. Like when people assume like, oh, that person knows right and wrong, they should know better. This is a great case to say, no,
No,
not
sir.
everybody does. I'm going to tell you about Beth Thomas, and that's going to change your mind.
And we certainly recommend, do we recommend that people check out that video to see for yourself? Like, I mean, you can't, I don't think words can describe it.
You have to watch the interview, I would say. It is shocking, but it is worth the watch.
That said, so I'm almost making a case where it's like, I'm saying that I don't believe in the soul, but I do. And I do. I'm not smart enough to get to that point where I do just right now, but I've read enough, where people have just described it enough to me where I kind of do believe it. But now that's, whether we turn good or turn evil, that's up to the people. You're so vulnerable as a child. It just, you really are. Like who you're going to be is in the hands of your parents. That's something. That's something, and we should be, thanking our parents right now. Shouldn't we? On this Father's Day?
Of course. Yeah, of course. Thanks to our parents for
that I'm not completely evil.
Yeah, instilling positive things in us.
Yeah, wow. Because that follows you around for the rest of your life. I mean, do you think that, she's still dealing with that. I think we both know that on some level, right? Some kind of intrusive thought, some kind of...
Greg, and it also brings up that thing that we talk to people about when they're grieving, and we talk about like, in order to make meaning of a loss, sometimes you have to think about, well, how would that person want you to live your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about that thought, it's like it brings up like how important others are into our development and into the direction that we go. So given if we just like disconnected from people, if we just that person's gone, I'm just I'm not going to think about stuff like that. I kind of lose my path, right? I kind of lose, like, it just shows you how much influence others have in our lives. And not to say that they control us, but we extract things from people, from everybody around us. We extract values, we extract our ideas about how we should be living our lives.
And it also like goes to show you how important, and it's hard to say this without sounding like corny or obvious. I don't know, but this is we're essentially talking about a love deficiency here.
Yeah.
I have been known to even say that love can be like a biological trick to get human beings to reproduce, right? But really, without it, we cannot survive. There's no human race without love, because if we need that love in the beginning of our lives, or else we die. And if we don't die, we become what is that? Like without an intervention, what would Beth be now?
Yeah.
Probably a murderer, right? At least, the very least. She did try to murder her brother.
I don't know how she would have survived. She was 6 years old doing these actions. How would she have survived? She would have
her father would have been gone, and she would have killed her brother. Jonathan's gone. The whole Jonathan Taylor Thomas is gone. Home Improvement. Yeah. That's what I like to imagine he is. But it's right. Wild story.
Up in a hospital and been unable to be adopted again or something like that. Yeah. And now she's thriving. Well, at least as far as we know. I know
as far as we know. And Dave,
you also don't have to. This also highlights one more thing. Two things actually before we wrap up. I know you want to wrap up soon. First off, it highlights that like you don't have to be someone's biological parent in order to have love for someone. You can be the adopted parent. You can be Uncle Jesse and Uncle Joey. Like you don't.
I don't get the reference.
No,
of course I do.
You got it, dude.
Good night, Michelle. That's what I'm trying to say to you.
You don't have to be a parent, like they're the biological parent, in order to be able to show love. And I think that's something important for everybody to keep in mind. Like, don't be afraid to be able to show love to a child that, you care about.
Yeah. And because it does matter.
It does. It really does. Like, if these adopted parents didn't exist, like you said, this would have been a totally different story. The other thing is,
I wonder if she sends him a Christmas card.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure she does. The other thing is, like, you also should try to gather as much information when you are in the adoption process as possible. Speak as much as you can to the providers, the caregivers, where they're at. Like, get to know, make sure you understand what you're getting into. I have seen other adopted parents who got into something that was a little bit more than they could handle at times, or just like things didn't play out the way that maybe they had envisioned. And, sometimes I think that can cause some to lose their spirit, to lose hope that things will get better. You're doing a great deed by getting into the adoption process. Don't forget that. And it's so detrimental to this individual who's already gone through loss that they don't just continue to experience loss. So it's important that people be super knowledgeable about what they're getting into and make sure that they have that mental capacity to do what's needed for this child.
100%.
These people did, for sure.
100%. And even when I have to admit my my bias, when it was like Methodist pastor, I was like, uh-oh. I don't know why I automatically thought that.
What?
I don't know why. Just like I maybe I've been doing a lot of research into like other things, like
why you getting into religion
stuff. What's that?
You getting into religion? Oh, about the cults for this.
Yeah.
I thought you were doing your own personal research on religions. Like, no. Which one's for me?
Nope. Yeah.
You've been church.
I can't pick any other one. Dave, we talked about Catholic guilt. I feel bad you're even saying it. How can you say that? There's only one for me.
I heard Greg's leaving the church. Nope.
All right, buddy. Well, I mean, a real feel-good pick here, Dave.
Yeah.
Maybe we can bounce back next week with something a little lighter. Maybe not. Who knows?
I think there was like one chuckle in this episode.
I mean, I felt like there was a couple, and I felt bad for chuckling. Inappropriate chuckles.
Isn't that your nickname?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's my clown name. Birthday parties.
Oh, I don't know if I can move on from that one.
That's a good way to end it.
Yeah, I'm gonna put name tags on our door, and this is gonna be inappropriate chuckles. Awesome. All right. I'll move on. So, thank you everybody for listening. We appreciate just sticking with this topic because this was like a tough one. Obviously the story, but like I said, it felt like an important one to tackle as well. So I hope, that we were able to do our due diligence for this. Thank you for any new listeners, our old listeners. I'm saying that for 2 weeks in a row. This is a great feeling, but again, tons of new listeners this week. So we appreciate everybody giving us a chance, and we appreciate those who keep coming around.
Yeah, no, we do appreciate it. And especially with the surges that we've been seeing, and we'd love that, but not a huge surge in reviews. And I mean, we could use that. I mean, if you're surging and you like it, I mean, drop us a 5-star. And if you don't like it, write us a letter.
Check out something else.
That's all.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely. If you like what you hear, or if you want to let us know your thoughts, feel free to leave us a review. Apple Podcasts is a great place to do that. So other than that, I think we're about done with this episode. So we will see you next week with another real doozy for you. Have a great night, everybody. See you then.
All right.